Coming to paperback and e-readers everywhere, E-Steam Horror of the Hyena Woman. Hell's aspiring angel takes on a wicked werewoman in this action-packed, all-new E-Steam series adventure. Pre-order your copy of E-Steam Horror of the Hyena Woman on Amazon.com today.
Today, the NYPD captured the individual responsible for the mass shooting that took place in the 36th Street train station in Brooklyn. Now, your Frank James is alleged to be the individual who was behind the mass shooting that took place in the N train in Brooklyn, and police say that they caught him based on an anonymous tip from an individual. Now, your Frank James may seem like an isolated individual who participated in this alleged mass shooting, but when I take a critical examination of Frank James's background, it fits right in line with the pattern and profile for beta males that I talk about in my book, The Man Crisis. And what's really disturbing about this whole incident with Frank James is that your Frank James was on the radar of the FBI, who had been monitoring his actions for some time. So many in government knew that your Frank James was a ticking time bomb, but many did not take his threat seriously. So your Frank James had been on the FBI's radar for some time, and what's really sad is they were too busy with other things to deal with this man in crisis who came onto YouTube for several years as the so-called prophet of truth. And according to old veteran YouTubers like Mr. Superboy, your prophet of truth had been on the platform for several years, and he had been making all sorts of comments on the YouTube platform in his videos for several years. So this guy had been floating around for several years in a very agitated state, and what's really sad is most people really did not pay attention to this man in crisis or see the clear and present danger that this man posed not only to himself but also to all of those around him. Now, I could easily see that there was something clearly wrong with this individual after I had posted a video, and viewers sent me links to his videos, and I took a look at many of his videos. And as I looked at his videos, I clearly saw him participating in a lot of the exact same behavior I had seen many other mass shooters participate in, such as the late Elliot Rodger and other mass shooters who had gone out here and posted videos before. And I saw the same erratic behavior pattern that I saw in Elliot Rodger, in your Frank James, and I saw the same types of disturbing video content that your Elliot Rodger presented that Frank James also presented in his videos. And in your Frank James's videos, he went out here looking to find others to blame for his grievances as related to race, similar to the way your Elliot Rodger was blaming people for his issues as related to not being able to have sex with attractive women. So there was a clear pattern to your Frank James's behavior that fit right in line with the other behaviors of other mass shooters. And what's really, again, really sad is that law enforcement did not take action to be able to deal with Frank James before he could go out here and do harm to 10 people who got shot and another 13 more who got injured. No, what's really sad is that there was a clear issue with this man, and this man, from what I saw in these videos that he presented just recently before his YouTube channel was taken down, was that he was definitely becoming a ticking time bomb, and this ticking time bomb It was not a matter of if he was going to explode in rage, it was a matter of when he was going to explode in rage, and it was a matter of what damage he was going to do when he went out here and exploded in this rage he was having as related to his issues, as related to all of these things such as race and politics and the entire mental health system. Now, in my previous video, I talked about how there are a lot of these men in crisis all across the country, and how these men are turning into landmines all across this country. Because in the aftermath of the COVID lockdowns, many of these men have been isolated for extended periods of time. And as these men have been isolated for extended periods of time, what has happened is these men have stepped into virtual echo chambers that are created on platforms of social media. And as these men have stepped into these echo chambers on social media created by these algorithms, which suggest more of the same content to these individuals then start going into their own world. And as they're in this rose-colored dark reality, they get the motivation to go out here and participate in acts of violence in the real world. And I believe that's what happened to your Frank James, aka Prophet of Truth, over the last 2 years. As he drifted from one place to the other, he built up this online platform and stayed inside of this echo chamber looking to have grievances with people as related to race and mental health, and even some politicians like New York Mayor Eric Adams. And as he simmered and boiled in anger inside of these echo chambers, he wound up getting more and more ideas in his head about going out here and doing harm to others. And then he eventually decided to act on the thoughts and feelings he had expressed in many of his videos. Because after watching several of his videos, I just heard him going out here and making what I believe to be implied and even express threats, and leaving a virtual trail of evidence that showed me not only a man looking to go out here and do harm, but a man who had also had deteriorating mental health. And this man's deteriorating mental health, what's really sad about it is no one really took all of his mental health issues seriously, as this homeless man drifted from one state to the other, drifting from one place to the next, and never really setting down any roots. And that is something that many people really don't take seriously about these men in crisis, because a lot of these men, they become more and more unstable because they don't have any sort of stability in their life. And as they're in a destabilized environment, their anxieties become more amplified, and that further makes their mental health deteriorate. And as their mental health deteriorates, these individuals go from being people who could possibly function to becoming more and more dysfunctional, because they don't really see any hope of their lives changing for the better, and they don't see any sort of hope of things getting better for them. So they go from being your prophet of truth to becoming a prophet of doom. And that is what happened to this individual on YouTube, Frank James. He wound up becoming more and more hopeless, and that's what made his mental health further deteriorate. And this man in crisis became more a clear and present danger to others. Unfortunately, many in government and many in your state and municipal services did not take his threat very seriously. Now you have those in the FBI sitting around saying, oh, there's going to be lone wolf attacks like guys like Frank James. But I have been talking about this for ever since about 2014 or 2015, when I was out here making videos about mass shooters. And when I back in 2017, and 2018, when I was out here writing The Man Crisis, I have been talking about how there are these individuals who are in crisis, and I can say that they're not lone wolves, as some in the government would say. No, this is a problem as related to the way we have been raising men in this country, and these men are all across the country as ticking time bombs, and these ticking time bombs have been simmering and boiling in rage all across this country. So this isn't just one lone wolf. No, we have an entire culture of men who are out here like this, and we have 2 to 3 generations of these men who are out here ever since the days of the feminist movement, because it was during the feminist movement that we wound up with this beta male becoming socially engineered. And when this beta male became socially engineered, that is when we started to see the rise in this type of extreme acts of violence, ranging from these guys participating in these murder suicides to all the way to these serial killers and the trend with these mass shooters. Now, many in government want to say that this was a gun control issue, but again, this was not a gun control issue. Frank James did not buy his guns illegally. No, like many other mass shooters, your Frank James went out here and bought his weapons legally. Even though he had been arrested, he was able to pass background checks because he moved from state to state, and the whole reason is that because he had moved from place to place, he did not have any felony convictions on his record, only misdemeanors. So this man easily slipped through the cracks the same way other beta male mass shooters slip through the cracks. So a lot of people want to sit there and make this a gun control issue, but when it comes down to many of these men in crisis, it is not a gun control issue. Many of these men, like your Frank James, your Elliot Rodger, and your Nicholas Cruz, these men went out here, bought their weapons legally, and they actually passed the background check for their weapons. And as they traveled from state to state with their weapons, these weapons were all legal, and there's no law that can stop any sort of beta male like this, because many of these men in crisis, one of the traits that they have is they're oftentimes law-abiding citizens until it's time for them to explode in a rage in some cases. But in the case of Frank James, he was just a drifter, and he had been drifting with a lot of anger, and he had been drifting with this anger for some time as related to the state of his life, and he had been dealing with mental health issues for years as related to reports from his sister. So this man had been in crisis for an extended period of time, and sadly, America's mental health system wasn't able to help him, as he stated in his videos, and America's mental health system hasn't really been able to help many of these men in crisis. And many of these men in crisis, they usually wind up drifting through homeless services, and whenever they drift through homeless services for years, they don't get the help or the counseling that they need. And usually what happens is that these guys, once they wind up falling through the cracks of the Department of Homeless Services and Mental Health Services, what happens to these individuals is the only time they actually do get any help is inside of the criminal justice system. This is the way it has been here in America ever since Ronald Reagan went out here and destroyed the entire mental health hospital system back in the 80s. And the way many men like Frank James sadly get any help is after they go out here and participate in some heinous act where they wind up doing harm to a large group of individuals or take the life of an individual. And again, it shows how America's systems are not able to help men in crisis because we have not invested in the mental health infrastructure to help deal with all of these men in crisis and help them get the help that they need as related to the mental health system. No, the only place many of these men wind up getting help is in the mental their mental health help is inside of the prison system, and that's when it's possibly too late for these individuals like Frank James, because individuals like Frank James, when they get inside of the prison system, that's when they are a threat to themselves and a threat to other inmates, and that's not the place where you want to get a guy like this help. No, the place to get these guys help is inside of a mental health facility. Now, there's another aspect to your Frank James that was quite troubling, and that aspect was that many of Frank James's videos on YouTube clearly showed a man who had deteriorating mental health, and sadly, many people will sit there and try to take his videos. They're going to take his videos down, and they're going to use it as a campaign to take down other YouTubers. Now, I don't think that that's right at all, to go out here and go and try to monitor other YouTubers and try to say that they are the same as Frank James. No, Frank James, like Elliot Rodger, who also had a YouTube channel, was an individual who had deteriorating mental health, and the whole thing is that Frank James, clearly he needed help, but sadly most people did not see how he was a danger to others or a danger to himself until it was time for this mass shooting. That's when everybody found out how your Frank James was a danger to others and himself, and that's when we started to see how this man in crisis was capable of extreme violence, and he was capable of extreme violence because he had reached the point of nothing to lose. And this is the point that most people don't really understand about a guy like Frank James, is like many beta male ticking time bombs, these guys, again, simmer and boil for many years, but you can stamp out that fuse if you get to these guys and get them the help that they need. But sadly, America won't invest in its men to get them that help. No, what we're looking to do is try to make a bad guy out of a guy like a Frank James and go out here and say, oh, let's put him in jail. And that doesn't really help solve this problem as related to your Frank James as an individual, and it doesn't solve the man crisis going on in this country, because it's easy to say, oh, it was a black guy who went out here and shot up a train, but he is as an individual, yes, it looks like that as an isolated incident, but once you start putting the pattern together of all of these individuals, you start to see a pattern as related to these men, a profile as related to these men, and you start to see a pattern as related to the behavior of these men, where they go out here and become these ticking time bombs. And sadly, many in America do not want to acknowledge the problem as related to these men turning into men in crisis, because that means pointing a finger at, one, many of the women here in America and the way that they raise boys, and two, it also means that we have to look at the politicians and their policies that they have created that have led to many of these men winding up becoming drifters who are homeless and not able to go out here and start any sort of life or build anything. And that's something many of your women, who are the largest block of voters, and your leftist politicians don't want to look at, because that means they have to be accountable for the policies that have created this man crisis. And when we directly connect the dots to their policies, that means some people may not wind up getting back into office. So this man crisis is the problem here as related to Frank James, because Frank James is just another individual who is a man in crisis. And this ticking time bomb, sadly, he wound up slipping through the cracks of the FBI, and he wound up overcoming the security of the MTA, the police department, and he wound up getting around the mayor. And if it wasn't for an individual going out here and getting a tip, sadly, this man in crisis possibly could have slipped through the cracks and drifted away again. And what's really sadder than this is that some are going to try to use this as a motive to go out here and censor YouTubers, but YouTubers are not the problem here as related to your prophet of truth. No, your prophet of truth was a man who was in crisis for many years, and sadly, many did not see how this was a man in crisis in their interactions and discussions with them in their videos, and that's because many have not really been trained on how to identify beta males and their erratic and dysfunctional behavior. But after watching 2 of his videos, I started to pick up on his pattern, and I quickly figured out, yes, this guy was a ticking time bomb, and he was a ticking time bomb for some time. And it was just, when I looked at his videos, I could see where things were going. And if I only watched them yesterday, but I could see where this guy was going. But the whole thing is, America doesn't see where guys like Frank James are going, because they don't want to acknowledge the man crisis in this country, and they don't want to acknowledge the ever escalating danger as related to this man crisis, because we are not just seeing these events happening once a week or once a month like I saw about 4 or 5 years ago. We're starting to see 2 to 3 of these incidents practically every day in this country. So we are seeing an increase in frequency of this violence, and this violence is becoming more and more extreme, every day. And sadly, many of your politicians, they are so caught up in catching one suspect and punishing one suspect that they cannot see that there are millions of these men out here, and that we are just at the tip of the iceberg as related to this man crisis. And until they go out here and make an investment in America's men, we are not going to be out of this man crisis anytime soon. As I've told people for several years, it is going to get a lot worse as related to this man crisis, and not better, because as we have seen with the lockdowns, the fuse on these individuals has been cut, and now we're dealing with landmines all across this country. And if we do have a recession, we may see even more of these individuals exploding in rage. So America doesn't even know that we're not even started with this man crisis. And sadly, many of our politicians are not aware of what to do about this man crisis. And even worse, many of them are not prepared to deal with this man crisis at all. And what's even sadder is they would rather do knee-jerk reactions like trying to go after YouTubers rather than go out here and try to find these men and get them help. I mean, what's really sad is the FBI had this guy on their radar and could have easily gotten this man help, but they let this man go. And then what happened was this man wound up doing harm to other people. And that's the saddest part about this whole situation is America's institutions are not prepared for this man crisis, and they're not prepared on how to come up with a constructive solution to getting America's men out of this crisis and back to some semblance of functionality. Now, if you want to learn more about what motivates men like a Frank James to participate in their violent behavior and the psychology behind their mental dysfunctions, you can pick up my book, The Man Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find The Man Crisis on Smashwords, the iBookstore, and Google Play. And if you want to see me make more men's issues videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, or my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Coming to paperback and e-readers, ISIS Legacy. The sorority secrets from the goddess next door are revealed in this all-new ISIS series adventure. Pre-order your copy of ISIS Legacy on Amazon.com today.